The word heuristic means it's a general guideline. It's like a rule of thumb, not a specific guideline where you have to follow it exactly. It's more of a guidance than a rule. So, Jakob Nielsen, the person who wrote this article, is part of the NNG group. You will see us whenever we're looking for research or fact-based opinions about user experience. We always refer to the NNG group. Jakob Nielsen and Don Norman were the fathers of user experience. They almost created all the basis of user experience before it became a science or a practice like it is today. So the first usability heuristic is visibility of system status. Now, what does this mean? My way of knowing this in my mind and like never missing it, because for me, this is the most important usability heuristic. That's why it's at the very top. What it means is the user should always know where they are and where to go next. The user should always know where they are on your website. Your design should always keep your user informed of what's happening with the system status. Are you loading something? Is there a place to go? Where am I right now? This rule applies so much to navigation, and that's why the example given kind of refers to navigation. When you are in a mall, you will see that dot that shows you where you are and where to go next. Tips to allow this usability heuristic to happen is you must always communicate clearly to your users what is the state of your system. No action with consequences to the user should be taken without informing them what is happening. Always present feedback to the user as quickly as possible. Ideally, it should happen immediately. If the user clicks something, they should see a response or a feedback that happens. You build trust with your user through open and continuous communication. Focus on navigation. Is it clear where the user is? Is it clear where the user needs to go? Where should they click? Pay attention to navigation with this heuristic. The second heuristic is called match between the system and the real world. Here, I want to introduce the concept or the word mental model. What's a mental model? Your users are interacting with so many other websites and applications before they interact with your product. So they already have a mental model of how things are done. All these initial design decisions that became design patterns were created by matching what happens in the real world. An example to that is when you're using a stovetop. If the knobs are shown or designed to match what's actually happening with the layout of the heating elements, the user will have so much ease to actually know where each knob is going to turn on the light. Tips to ensure this heuristic: make sure your users understand the meaning without having to go look up a word's definition. So don't use jargon, don't use words that you're very familiar with. Maybe you and your product managers are familiar with a jargon, but your users don't necessarily know it. So use clear words that match the user's mental model. Never assume that they already understand something. User research will help you uncover what is your user's mental model if you're not familiar with what they know and what they don't. Now, the third usability heuristic is user control and freedom. What does that mean? Users very often could perform an action by mistake. They need a clearly marked emergency exit. Never let your user feel that they're stuck. They may have opened a model by mistake or clicked on an action that initiated a wizard by mistake. They should always have the ability to cancel. Just like with physical spaces, give them that also in your interface, making sure there's a close button, making sure there's a back button so that they can retrace their steps. Always support undo and redo. Make sure the exit is clearly labeled and discoverable. Number 4, consistency and standards. Users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. Follow platform and industry conventions. For example, When you're using an iOS phone, when you're using an iPhone, the back button is always on the top left of your screen. The user already is very used to this concept. They're familiar with it. Whenever they want to hit back, they go to that top left. Now, when you're creating a product, if you change the space where the back button is placed on an iPhone, you will be creating conflict for the user's mental model. Tips to achieve this: improve learnability by maintaining both types of consistency, internal and external. Maintain consistency within a single product or family of products. So for example, when you create icons, we make sure that all these icons look like they belong within the same family of icons. When you establish a pattern for your user, you want to maintain that pattern so it's easier for your user to understand the connection between things. Heuristic number 5 is error prevention. Create good error messages. They are very important, but the best designs will carefully prevent a problem from even happening. So as much as possible, you want to eliminate the possibility of your user getting into an error state. But that's sometimes unavoidable. So when there's an error state, plan for it and create it properly. Guardrails are something that will help your users not getting into errors. So on a curvy mountain road, it prevents drivers from falling off the cliff. It's a prevention. How do we create this prevention? Prioritize your effort. Prevent high-cost errors first, then little frustrations. So first start with the critical things, then the smaller frustrations. There's slips and mistakes. Slips are unconscious errors caused by inattention. Mistakes are more conscious errors, but they're based on a mismatch between the user's mental model and the actual design. So avoid slips by providing helpful constraints and good defaults, but prevent mistakes by removing memory burdens, supporting undo, and warning your users when there's something to avoid. Recognition rather than recall, that's the next point, and it's a bit connected to the previous one. Minimize the memory load by making elements, actions, and options visible to the user. The user should not have to remember information from one part of the interface to another. Humans, of course, have short-time memories. So interfaces that promote recognition reduce the amount of cognitive effort that a user has to go through. An example of heuristic number 6, it's easier for most people to recognize the capital of countries instead of having to remember them. People are more likely to correctly answer the question, is Lisbon the capital of Portugal? Rather than, what is the capital of Portugal? Let's say you're designing a form where the user have to enter the state that they live in. Let's say they're entering shipping information and they need to enter a state. Do you think you should use a text field or a drop-down? If you live in that state, of course, you know the name of your state, but rather than go type it and try to remember how to spell Nunavut, if I offer you a drop-down with all the different states in Canada, you will very easily select Nunavut versus trying to spell it. So that's recognition versus recall. The next heuristic, number 7, it's flexibility and efficiency of use. This concept speaks more to designing for multiple users, offering shortcuts for your power users. Shortcuts may be hidden from novice users who are using your interface for the first time, but it will really speed up the work of a returning user who has been here before and has lots of things to do. An example for this heuristic number 7 is regular routes are listed on the map, but the locals, they have knowledge of shortcuts. So we want to create those shortcuts for power users. Tips to do this: provide accelerators. Like on an iPhone, when you want to delete a message, you either can click on it, select it, and click delete, or you can swipe it. The swipe gives you that hidden delete action that maybe a novice user does not know but as you become a well-practiced user, you will appreciate that shortcut. Provide personalization by tailoring content and functionality for individual users. Allow for customization so users can make selections about how they want the product to work. Heuristic number 8, aesthetics and minimalistic design. This aspect speaks to modern design that has become more simple, more to the point. Don't waste your design by putting information that is not as critical or necessary. Any additional information will take away from the focus of your users, so make sure to focus on what's important. An example to Heuristic 8 is these 2 tea kettles. One of them is very decorative and pretty, the yellow one, but it has a handle that's hard to hold, and it has, a nozzle that's very hard to wash. The purple one, however, is more simple, yet it's more effective and usable. And that's just an example. Of course, that's not saying don't make things pretty or creative, but focus on making things effective. Keep the content and visual design focused on the essentials. Don't let unnecessary elements distract your user from the information they really need. Number 9, help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. How do you help them recover from errors? Good error messages are very, very important. Use traditional error messages, bold red text. Tell your users in clear language, not in jargon. Tell them what has gone wrong. When you log into a website and you get a 404 error, you may know what that means because you're studying to be a developer, but a regular user does not know what is 404 or 500 or 200. Never use codes. And this is such an important heuristic because in the past, when developers designed websites, they actually used 500 as an error message or 404, and people had no clue what that meant. So make sure to create clear messages that show something is wrong. Last but not least, heuristic number 10 is about help and documentation. Ideally, you want to create a product that is super clear and usable, that you don't need documentation. But it is very essential to have help and documentation, especially for complex application when you need them. 10 usability heuristics for user interface design. If you follow these general guidelines, you'll be able to create a usable interface.